It stood in silence at the far end of the chapel, a chipped marble statue of the Virgin Mary, tucked behind half-broken pews, forgotten by time. The sisters passed by it without thought, sometimes crossing themselves but never pausing. It was old, cracked. Its eyes had once been painted blue, but now they were faded, hollow. Until one evening, during a routine inspection of the building's foundation cracks, a maintenance camera briefly panned across the statue and paused. The eyes blinked. The camera shook slightly, then zoomed in. It wasn't a glitch. The statue's head had tilted, ever so slightly. Its lips, long silent, were parted by a hair's width. Something had moved. Something inside the marble. The western wing of St. Bridget's Convent had been sealed for over 10 years. After the fire, most assumed it was just another forgotten part of a building too large for the dwindling number of sisters who remained. Time had settled into its corners like dust, thick and unmoving. Plaster crumbled in soft flakes from the ceilings, and the scent of old wood and damp stone clung to the air. No one went there unless they had to. Even then, they rarely lingered. It wasn't that anyone believed the space was cursed. Not directly. But silence can breed superstition, and the West Chapel had long become a silent place. Before the fire, it had been used for early morning vigils and private prayer. The walls were lined with faded frescoes, most long obscured by soot. The crucifix remained, still nailed above the altar, though blackened by heat. Beneath it, tucked into the far left alcove, stood the statue, the one no one could remember commissioning, and yet everyone swore had always been there. It had survived the flames without a single crack, though everything around it had scorched. That alone gave it weight, unease, respect. Over the years, it gathered dust and stories, until even the stories faded. Sister Helena had only recently arrived at the convent, transferred from another house after a season of rest. She was younger than most and believed that stillness didn't mean something was dead. When she asked about the West Chapel, the responses were vague. Some warned her it was best left alone. Others said they had meant to reopen it for years but hadn't found the time. She sensed the discomfort and quietly requested permission to restore it herself. Mother Agnes agreed with reluctance. A quiet blessing, nothing more. The first day she entered, the door groaned as if disturbed from slumber. Dust curled in the air like forgotten breath. Light filtered through the broken stained glass, spilling soft colors onto the cracked stone floor. The statue stood in its alcove, covered with a sheet. She approached it without fear, her steps echoing in the hollow silence. She didn't remove the sheet completely, just enough to see the shape, a figure of the Virgin, hands open, eyes cast downward. One finger had snapped off. Her robes were chipped at the edge. Still, there was something serene in its posture. She left it wrapped. It didn't seem right to disturb it further. Over the next few days, she began sweeping the floor, clearing cobwebs, washing the soot from the walls where she could reach. Other sisters passed occasionally, watching from the door but never entering. At night, she prayed alone in the main chapel and wondered why the West Wing had been forgotten so thoroughly. No one gave her a clear answer. They only said the fire had been small, but the fear had lingered long after the smoke cleared. She didn't tell anyone when she noticed the dust around the statue was never quite the same. Each morning, a small circle had formed at its base, as if something heavy had shifted, like marble breathing in slow motion. Once, she found a fragment of white stone near the hem of the statue's robe, newly broken, though nothing above was missing. She swept it away and said nothing. She told herself it was just settling. Old buildings move. Old statues do too. But sometimes, as she turned to leave, she felt something. Not seen, not heard, but sensed. A heaviness in the air. A presence. She prayed more and worked harder. The chapel was coming back to life, but something beneath the surface had begun to stir with it. Not evil, not holy, just old. waiting. The installation of security cameras had been a practical decision. In recent years, break-ins had increased across the region. Churches and convents were not spared. Some intruders came for copper wiring, others for sacred objects, and still others for reasons no one could quite explain. St. Brigid's was quiet and tucked away, but not immune. Mother Agnes approved the system reluctantly. Not for fear, she insisted, but for stewardship. If something sacred was to be kept safe, someone needed to watch. The system was modest, a few fixed cameras placed in vulnerable corners, quietly recording and feeding to a small locked monitor in the main office. One of the cameras had been installed in the western wing, mostly to test the cable run through the older masonry. Its lens was directed toward the back of the abandoned chapel, angled from the upper corner where two walls met in a dark seam of dust and stone. The statue of the Virgin fell squarely within its field of view. No one thought much of it. The feed, like the rest, ran on a loop. Nothing ever happened. For the first few nights, the footage was unremarkable. Low light, still air, the occasional insect passing too close to the lens. Static now and then, expected in such thick walls. But then came the flickers. It was subtle at first. At approximately 3:02 a.m., the feed would distort, only for a second. A brief, silent shudder in the image, just enough to notice if someone was watching, which no one was. A few days later, the glitch lasted longer. The frame darkened, brightened, then returned to normal. Some blamed the electrical system. Others called it irrelevant. But one night, the glitch returned with something new. The statue's hands had moved. It wasn't obvious at first glance. The fingers still pointed downward as always, but the palms, which had once been angled toward the floor, now opened slightly. Outward, not by force, not broken, but changed. Sister Helena noticed it during her morning cleaning. She couldn't say what felt different, only that something was off. The fingers cast new shadows. The pose no longer looked passive. It looked expectant. She requested the footage. The recording showed nothing unusual until the moment of the glitch. During the distortion, a faint blur crossed the screen. When it cleared, the hands had changed. The sisters gathered in the office the next day, watching the moment over and over, frame by frame. The alteration was real, but no one had entered the room. The doors had been locked. No human had touched the statue. After that, motion alerts began to ping, always around the same time, just after 3 in the morning. The camera registered movement, but playback revealed nothing. Just the statue, the candles, the dust. Sometimes, a faint breath of air that stirred the cloth near the base. Once, the camera caught a slight shift in lighting. Not from outside, not from within, but as if the air around the statue had thickened and then released. Finally, one night, the camera zoomed in on its own. There was no human input, no technician active. The system logged the command, but no one claimed it. The camera slowly focused closer on the statue's face, stabilizing on the cracked cheek and hollow eyes. That's when it happened. The eyelids twitched, just once, a soft, almost imperceptible flutter. Not mechanical, not digital, but organic. A blink that should not have been possible. The marble should not have moved, and yet the frames did not lie. What was once stone had shifted like skin. Afterward, the feed froze for 5 seconds. When it resumed, the statue looked exactly as it always had. The eyes were dull again, the hands unchanged. But those who saw it knew something irreversible had occurred. The camera had seen something it was never meant to see, and whatever it was, it had noticed. Word of the camera footage spread slowly through the convent, carried not through gossip, but through lowered voices and hesitant glances. No one openly acknowledged what they had seen. Even those who had reviewed the footage more than once struggled to say the word moved. But the atmosphere shifted. Sisters lingered less near the west hallway. Some stopped going entirely. Candles in the main chapel were lit earlier and burned longer. The silence during morning prayers felt deeper, as if the air had thickened. Something had been touched, awakened, though no one could say what. The statue itself remained in place, covered again with its cloth. But even veiled, it seemed to radiate presence. Not cold, not warm, but watchful. Observing. Mother Agnes, who had resisted outside involvement for years, finally made a discreet request to the diocese. She did not call it an emergency. She did not mention the footage in writing. She simply asked for someone with experience in things outside ordinary understanding. A man was sent, not a famous exorcist, not a theologian, just a quiet, elderly priest named Father Donnellon, who had seen too much in too many forgotten places. He arrived without ceremony. No vestments, no entourage, just a simple suitcase, a worn rosary around his wrist, and a face marked by long years of silence. He asked few questions and accepted fewer answers. On his second day, he visited the chapel. Alone. He carried no tools but a flashlight and a small vial of oil. He stood before the statue without removing the cloth. Instead, he moved slowly around it, observing its base, the air around it, the texture of the walls. He touched nothing at first. The chapel was quiet, but not peaceful, the kind of quiet that presses against the ears and makes breathing feel louder than it should. When he finally reached for the edge of the covering, he did so with care, as one might lift a page from an ancient manuscript. The statue beneath looked unchanged, pale marble streaked with soot, cracked in 3 places. The Virgin's face, serene, the hands positioned outward, still and open. He moved closer, standing less than a foot away, eyes level with hers. Then he reached out and pressed 2 fingers gently against the statue's forehead. He recoiled. It was not cold. Not like stone. It was colder, actively cold, the kind of cold that pulls heat from skin instantly. He tried again, placing his whole hand against the stone. This time his fingertips burned as if frostbitten. He stepped back and anointed the statue's brow with oil, tracing a cross. Nothing happened. Until midnight. That night, as the sisters prepared for rest, every candle in the building extinguished at once. Not gradually, not with wind. One moment the halls were filled with flickering light, the next, total darkness. Not even the emergency bulbs responded. The entire electrical system died. Silence followed, thick and heavy, and then, somewhere deep in the convent, a sound echoed, a creaking, not loud, not sharp, but unmistakable. Wood under pressure. Stone shifting. When power returned 2 minutes later, the cameras rebooted. Most resumed their normal feeds, but the one trained on the statue glitched violently before cutting to black. The screen showed nothing for nearly 7 minutes. Then, without explanation, it came back online. The statue stood unchanged, but the oil that had been placed on its brow was gone. Not wiped, not absorbed, gone entirely. And for the first time since the fire years ago, condensation appeared on the glass windows of the west wing, as if something inside had exhaled. In the days that followed, the convent adjusted outwardly to normal routines, but the undercurrent of unease deepened. The lights had been restored, the cameras recalibrated, and the chapel returned to silence. Yet the silence no longer felt benign. It had depth now, a density that settled into the corners of rooms and clung to the air. Conversations became shorter, prayers more urgent, and Sister Helena, though she spoke little of it, had begun to feel something following her. It started as a sensation at the edge of awareness, being watched, not constantly and not everywhere, but only in moments of stillness. Particularly, in the early hours between the last night bell and the first light, she would kneel in the main chapel, beads slipping between her fingers, and feel eyes behind her. Turning revealed nothing, but the feeling remained. Heavy, expectant. One morning, before sunrise, she returned to the West Chapel alone. She did not enter. She only stood in the doorway, half hidden in the corridor, watching the dim interior through the glass panel of the door. The statue remained veiled, the cloth draped loosely over the marble form. The air seemed still, but then she noticed the light. A faint shimmer like candlelight dancing along the far wall, yet no candle had been lit. She stepped closer, peering through the glass again. The flicker vanished. That same day she found a thin gray streak running down the chapel floor, beginning beneath the statue and ending at the center aisle. It was not ash. It was not water. She touched it gently and found it thick, almost oily, with a faint metallic scent. When she returned moments later with a cloth to clean it, the stain was gone. That night, her dreams shifted. She had always dreamed, in fragments, childhood places, distant faces, but now the dreams centered in one place. A long hallway, cold, stone-walled. At the end, the statue stood, not as marble, but living. The face was the same, but the eyes looked back, watching, unmoving. There was no fear in the dream, only stillness. And each night, the hallway in the dream drew shorter. By the end of the week, the chapel had grown noticeably colder. Only that space. The rest of the convent remained warm with late spring air, but the western wing chilled inexplicably. Breath fogged lightly in the mornings. Dew formed on the stone floor despite dry forecasts. The sisters avoided that corridor altogether. Then came the morning when she found the tear. It rested on the statue's cheek, unmistakable. Not a stain, not damage, but a single gray droplet tracing a slow path downward. Its shape was too precise, too fresh. She reached out without thinking and touched it. It was warm. Startled, she stepped back. A gust of still air moved past her, though no window was open. The chapel fell into a deeper silence. The cloth covering the statue rustled slightly, but did not fall. She said nothing to the others that day. Not because she doubted what she saw, but because she feared what might follow if she gave it voice. And later, when she returned with another sister, the tear was gone. The face was dry, the cloth unmoved, but the camera had seen it. They played the footage, frame by frame. The moment was there. The cloth lifted, slightly. A line appeared along the cheek, the shape of a droplet. It moved slowly, trailing downward. No one had entered the room. No one had touched the statue. And just before the image flickered out, for a brief and terrible second, the statue's eyelids narrowed. Not in blink, not in expression, but as if it were focusing. And then the screen turned black. The atmosphere in the convent thickened with each passing day. The sisters no longer tried to dismiss the unease they felt. It lingered in their footsteps, in the way they paused before turning corners, in how they averted their gaze when passing the west hallway. The statue, veiled and unmoved, had become the center of a silence that felt almost sentient. Something unseen was pressing against the order of things. The rosaries grew shorter. The candles were lit more frequently. The prayers were whispered, as if louder voices might attract unwanted attention. It was Sister Agnes who called the meeting. Not all were present. Some claimed illness, others prayed alone. But those who came sat in the circle with pale faces and tight hands. The question was clear, unspoken, but weighty. What should be done? The footage, the temperature changes, the whispered dreams. None of it could be denied any longer. They had recorded the blinking. They had seen the tear. But what it meant, no one dared interpret aloud. Some called for the statue to be removed. Others warned that disturbing it might worsen whatever had already been set in motion. Sister Helena remained silent for a long time. Then she spoke, not of fear, but of understanding. She had seen something no one else had. Not terror, but recognition. It wasn't just watching. It was learning. The statue, or what moved through, it was listening. And in a strange, silent way, it was beginning to respond. Later that night, Helena returned alone to the chapel. She carried no candles, only her rosary. The statue stood where it always had, draped in the same linen covering, untouched since the beginning. She sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, the silence pressing close around her. For hours she said nothing. She didn't pray. She didn't plead. She simply waited. Midway through the night, the linen cloth rustled gently, though the air was still. One corner lifted slightly, revealing the pale marble face beneath. Her eyes adjusted slowly. The statue appeared unchanged, but the longer she looked, the more she saw. The faint gray streak on the cheek had deepened. A fine crack now ran from the corner of the eye to the jaw. The stone mouth, once closed, had parted slightly. She whispered a question, not in words, but in thought, in the quiet space between breaths. The air grew colder, and in that stillness, something stirred behind her mind. Not a voice, not a presence, but a shape forming in silence. It wasn't malicious, it wasn't kind. It was simply there, ancient, waiting, restrained not by chains or stone, but by attention. It had not acted before because no one had truly seen it. Now it had been seen. At that moment, every candle in the convent went out again, just like before. The power held, but the light failed. The silence returned, deeper this time, like the stillness before a storm breaks. When the others found Helena at dawn, she was still seated on the floor. The cloth had fallen completely away from the statue. Her face was streaked with tears, but her expression was calm. She stood without a word, walked past them, and returned to her cell. Later, when the cameras were reviewed, they showed something strange. Not dramatic. Just one frame, barely a flicker, where the statue's mouth was open wider than before. In the next frame, it was closed. And in Helena's room, a single word had been etched into the condensation on the window, though no hand had touched it. It read, "Watch." The morning after Helena's vigil, the convent felt different. Nothing had visibly changed. The walls stood as they always had, the floors cold beneath soft shoes, the bells rang on time, but the silence now was not just absence of sound. It was listening. The sisters moved more slowly through the halls, speaking less, avoiding Helena's eyes. She had become quiet in a new way, present but set apart, as if something within her had shifted. She prayed at different hours, wrote at length in her journal, and returned often to the West Chapel. Now, with the door no longer locked, no one questioned her. No one followed. The statue had not moved since that night, but it no longer needed to. The covering remained folded neatly beside the altar, untouched. The marble was cracked deeper than before, a network of fine lines, across its chest and arms. Yet the face had softened. It no longer looked like stone pretending to be flesh, but something in between. Something that had once been dormant and now waited with awareness. The sisters tried to ignore it. They turned off the monitor linked to the chapel camera. They ceased reviewing the footage, but that did not stop the device from recording, and the footage, without prompting, began saving itself. Short clips, each between 5 and 15 seconds, always from between 2:45 and 3:10 a.m. Some showed nothing. Some showed slight changes in light, in shadow, in air. One showed the statue's eyes glowing faintly, not brightly, but just enough to catch the light and send it refracting unnaturally. Another showed the walls of the chapel briefly vibrating, the edges of the stone warping inwards before returning to place. The footage spread beyond the convent. One of the technicians, disturbed by what he saw, shared it anonymously. It appeared online in small circles, shared, debated, dismissed, and then resurfaced again. Most believed it to be a clever hoax. Others did not. A handful of quiet messages reached the convent by mail, handwritten notes with phrases like, "We saw it too," or "The veiled ones are waking." They were never signed. Then, in late autumn, the statue split open. It did not shatter. It did not collapse. It simply opened, slowly, like a door long unused. The stone cracked down the center, a jagged seam splitting the torso. From within, there was no blood, no mechanical core, no sculpture beneath sculpture. Only light. A light that did not illuminate but saturated. Warm, golden, thick. It poured outward in slow pulses, not flooding the room but filling it like breath fills lungs. It was not blinding. It was not harsh. It was beautiful in a way that defied understanding, terrifying and sacred at once. Those who saw it fell silent. Helena did not flinch. She walked forward. Her steps did not echo. She stood before the open statue and raised her hands, not in defense, but in offering. The light reached toward her like a tide drawn to its shore. It touched her forehead, her chest, her hands, and then it drew her in. No one saw her walk. No one saw her move. But when the light faded and the statue sealed once more, she was no longer there. Her room was found empty, though nothing had been taken. Her journal was closed, with a single sentence written in the center of the final page. I was not afraid, because I was already known. Since that day, the statue has not moved. It remains cracked. Still, the cameras remain blank during the night hours. But sometimes, when the air is just right and the sun falls across the altar at a certain angle, the light inside the stone flickers, as if remembering. The statue remains standing in the western chapel, silent and fractured, its stone body baring. The long vertical seam that never fully closed. It has not moved again. It has not wept or blinked. To visitors, it is simply a damaged relic from another era, quietly occupying its place in the shadow of the altar, framed by faded glass and dust-soft light. The linen covering was never returned. No one speaks of it anymore. The sisters pass, the chapel with quiet reverence now, some crossing themselves, others bowing their heads, though none will admit why. The door remains open during daylight hours, but only a few ever step fully inside. Sister Helena was never found. Her name remains. On the records, her room left undisturbed, her belongings preserved with care but never touched. Her journal was stored in the archive, its final message etched into the memory of those who read it. Some say she was taken. Others say she was chosen. One or two whisper that she became part of something larger, that she crossed a threshold, that was never meant to be opened, and that what lies beyond it is neither death nor life, but recognition. The cameras were never removed. Though the feed is no longer monitored, the system records every night without fail. Occasionally, the red indicator light will blink at odd hours, suggesting activity where none should exist. The footage, when reviewed, often reveals nothing. But sometimes, rarely, a single frame will capture something unsettling. A shift in shadow, a soft distortion in the light, a faint shimmer across the surface of the statue's face. The technicians who maintain the system now cycle the drives quietly, never lingering too long on playback. The townspeople who visit the convent chapel on feast days sometimes pause at the far end of the nave, drawn toward the fractured sculpture, without knowing why. Children have been seen staring at it for long minutes, transfixed, as if they sense something the adults have long forgotten how to feel. One elderly visitor once asked why the statue looked familiar. When told it had been there since before the fire, she only nodded and said she remembered it breathing. In the evenings, as the sun slips through the high windows and casts long, trembling beams of amber light across the stone floor, the chapel grows still in a way that feels full rather than empty. That stillness is no longer absence. It is presence, quiet, deep, and waiting. And in that stillness, if one watches closely from the far pew and does not blink, they might see it, the faintest movement beneath the stone eyelids, like the memory of a glance returning. The convent continues its rhythm. Bells ring, prayers are said, bread is broken, but something remains behind the ritual now, something remembered in the silence between words, something no longer sealed by marble or time. The statue is broken, yes, but not lifeless. It watches still, and once a year, always on the same night, the candles in the West Chapel light themselves. No hand touches them. No sound precedes it, just flame. Then stillness. Then the air, just for a moment, breathing.